Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Started by a group of citizens in a small Michigan town with a like-minded goal
of increasing the visibility
of the unseen and unheard populations in our community.
Our guests will share stories and insights
with the goal of increasing our awareness and knowledge
of various aspects of diversity and equity
to create a more connected, empathetic, and inclusive community.
So, let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
So let's get to work.
So, let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Amy Phoenix, and today I'm here with Emily LaPrairie. Emily has been a Midland resident for 3 years, but is formerly from Bay City. She lives with her partner, Miguel, and their 2 children, Victoria and Joey. They have a cat named Taylor and a dog named Ginger. Emily is a survivor of abuse, neglect, and suicide. She's been diagnosed with ADHD and CPTSD. Emily is a coach, consultant, and advocate for neurodivergent and trauma-affected people. She's also an artist, using media such as glass, beads, and paint to express herself. Welcome, Emily. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being willing to share your story and your experience with us. We're so grateful to have you here. I'd really like to start by just getting to know you a little bit and inviting you to share some of your background, what brings you here today, and what really brings you to life.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me here. So my name is Emily LaPrairie. I am a resident of Midland, Michigan, formerly from Bay City, Michigan. And I'm basically a jack of all trades. I have worked in a lot of different areas, and I have recently, in the past year and a half, gone out on my own. I have a degree in small business management and entrepreneurship from Delta College, and that sort of geared me up to start my own businesses, of which I am now on business number 5. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I also am really passionate about helping people who have been through similar experiences as what I have been through. So I have a pretty checkered history when it comes to suicide. My first suicide attempt was when I was 11 years old. Yeah, I was 11 years old in 6th grade. And my last attempt was August 31st of 2021. And it was after that last attempt that I realized I really wanted to get into the area of trauma. I wanted to first really heal my trauma, the trauma that made me have these ideations and made me not want to live anymore. Because in reality, when I'm not in that space, I love life, right? And I think that that's a general misunderstanding about people who are suicidal, is that they always want to die. Like they always want to feel, like they always feel that way. For me, that's not the case. And I know for several other people, that's not the case either. So when I was back to a normal, regulated state and I was back to loving life, I wanted to make sure that I didn't go to that place again. So once I started clearing out that trauma, I started realizing that I could help others as well. And so that's where I am today.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you again for being here and just for being courageous and sharing your story. And it sounds like really seeking ways to understand like what was underneath that for you and then sharing that with others and supporting them. It's amazing and it's so needed. So I just want to thank you for that personally and in our community as well. So with your story, if you're willing and open, what else would you like to share? What would you like listeners to know and to understand?
There are a couple of things that when I am in, and so this is speaking to listeners who are feeling suicidal. There are a couple things that I repeat to myself on a loop when I'm in that dysregulated state, when I feel like the world would be better off without me, is I'm not real. No one loves me. I hate saying those things because I know that they're not true, but yeah. And the worst one is that I'm alone. Those statements are really damaging statements that we say to ourselves when we're in the depths of these suicidal attempts, or, these bouts of heavy depression, right? And so I want to tell the people that are saying that to themselves right now to please flip the switch for yourself. Turn it around for yourself. You are not alone. People do love you. And you are real. Like, you are a real important person.
Yeah. Touching into those deep places can be so painful. Are there some specific moments that you want to share where you felt that and you were able to be with it in a way where you could flip the switch? Some experiences that you had where you were able to do that, because I can imagine that it's just not easy, and maybe hearing about that would be helpful for some too.
Sure. So the work that I've done on emotional regulation has really just, it's done wonders for how I approach these situations. It used to just be, I had no control over how low I went and how long I stayed there and how hard it was to go back up. Like, I had no control over that. So for a good example, yesterday, I was heavily triggered by something, and instead of holding it in and letting it fester, I did for a couple hours. It was situational, I had to. But I went home and I practiced something called swamping. Are you familiar with that term?
No, share more.
So swamping is when it's almost sort of like shadow work. But it's like situational shadow work. It's not necessarily, it's intentional, but it's situational. So I was triggered. I felt horrible things about, the thing that had triggered me. I felt dumb. I felt worthless. I felt super low. I felt unwanted. I felt like people were talking about me behind my back. Like, this is how it starts, right? And so I went home and I intentionally exploded in a safe place with a safe person, with my partner. So that's what swamping is like you allow yourself to feel before you don't have control over it anymore, right? So the explosion was going to occur. It was going to. But I had control over when and where and how it occurred. And after 20 minutes of just unloading and crying and talking about how I felt, this weight was lifted off of me. And I said, okay, that's enough. I know what I have to do. And I was able to finish out the rest of the day, for the most part, in a regulated manner. And then now by today, I already know like the end result of what I have to do to rectify this situation, instead of just putting myself back in the same situation over and over again and hoping that it fixes itself, right?
Yeah. So it sounds like you really have developed some awareness and skills to be able to meet those lows in another way. And so I'm wondering, would you like to walk us through a little more of that process? Like you shared in August, there was another experience, and then, some of the training that you're going through. And I'm just curious about how that has transformed over time, and maybe even if you want to share a little bit more of the background.
Sure. So I would say that one of the biggest triggers in my life is the fact that I was molested as a child. And that obviously caused PTSD. But the most harmful thing was that my abuse was swept under the rug. I wasn't allowed to talk about it. I was made to feel like I was being dramatic or lying, or at the very best that I feel like one of the most damaging statements my mother ever said to me was when I asked her, just point blank, "Do you believe me?" She said, "I believe that you believe you." So that constant, I'm not really quite sure what to call it at the moment, but being disbelieved, being gaslit, being ignored, being ridiculed, caused complex PTSD. And so I would be okay. I mean, I was actually doing really well up until this incident that occurred on August 31st. And the incident was, so the person who molested me is still somewhat he was at that time anyway, still somewhat in my life, although I didn't want him to be. But he's not blood-related family to me, but it's family that I've grown up with, and so I go to their events. And so there was a wedding on August 31st, and I went to the wedding, and there was just several instances. Usually he leaves me be, because, I mean, it's like the skeleton in the closet that everyone knows about. He knows I don't want anything to do with him. And usually when my partner's around, he respects that. My partner had to work that day. So he started first by coming up to me while I was holding my baby niece, and he started stroking her head and saying how beautiful she was, and it made sorry, I'm getting like chills. So he started stroking the head of my niece as I was holding her and saying how beautiful she was, and it made the hairs on my arms stand up. And so he came up behind me about an hour later, and he touched the small of my back, and that's like the only way that I knew he was there. So he kind of caught me off guard and touched me. And I'm still, in my head, I'm like, I'm okay. I'm safe. I'm in a public place. I'm not going to be harmed. And then, so I'm sitting down about a half hour later, and the bride and groom are giving toasts to each other. And so we're all sitting down, we're listening, and I'm completely involved in what's going on up there. It's super romantic, and I'm like, oh gosh, this is so cute. And then all of a sudden, I feel breath on my left ear, and it's him. And he like breathes and whispers into my ear, "I love your hair." And for context, I have really long, beautiful, rainbow-colored hair. And in that second, I wanted to go home and shave my head. Like, I literally considered it. I just stopped considering it, like, last week, to be honest. So it just, those 3 instances with him that day got me to a point where I just wasn't okay. I just was not okay. I came home and I talked to my partner about it, and it's not his fault at all, but he said one thing that shouldn't have been said, which we don't even have to go into because it's not the point. The point was just that I was in a really bad state. And I just snapped. And I tried to drink myself to death.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the most horrible nights of my life. And then when I woke up the next morning, I remember saying, shit, I'm still alive. Which usually when I've had these episodes, they didn't carry into the next day. Like I would wake up and be like, God, I don't want to feel that way again. Or like, I don't actually want to be gone. Not that morning. I had actually completely blacked out, and had continued trying to hurt myself over and over again. All night long, my partner stayed with me. My niece, who was an adult, was with me for a portion of time. But basically, I was babysat all night. And I was constantly, my partner was constantly having to stop me from hurting myself. And so I woke up the next morning and, I said, great, still alive. Even I failed at that, right? And, I said this out loud and he's listening to me and he's just looking so deflated. And he's trying to get me to go to get out of bed and have breakfast. And I said, no, I can't. I don't want to eat. I don't want to eat. I don't want to drink. I don't want to do anything. I just want to lay here until I die. And there was a little bit of back and forth about that for a while. And he finally kind of snapped at me and was just like, can you please stop saying that? Like, I love you. We all love you. We would be devastated if you left. And so I spent the rest of the day in a fog. And by the next day because I was a bookkeeper at this time, I had reached out to my clients, and the one good thing I had really done up until then, it was an accommodation that I made for myself that I didn't even really know I was making for myself, is I only took on bookkeeping clients that were completely aligned with me. And because of that, I didn't have anybody going like, seriously, you're just going to like take some time off? Like, no. All of my clients were like, absolutely, we completely understand. You let us know if you need anything. You take all the time you need. And I'm like, oh, great. So I took about a week. And then I was able to get back. I was able to start working again, but I wasn't able to start marketing again. And so that was kind of the turning point. Like I felt like I was doing the wrong things in life. I felt like I was helping the wrong people. And it took about 2 months for me to realize that I wanted to help people like me. I started counseling like a week after that ordeal, right? And about 2 months into the counseling, I'm like, I think maybe this is something that I might want to do, but maybe not in like a counseling or therapy session type of way, maybe something different. I don't know, and so I had already done some business consulting and on the side of my bookkeeping, and it seemed to be that people were more interested in that than the bookkeeping, and it seemed to be like kind of where I shined. And so at the first of the year, I just decided that I was going to start, at the time I called it business coaching, but I'm sort of moving away from that term because I don't feel like it truly defines what I do. I'm moving towards more of a consultant for trauma-affected and neurodivergent people. So I have CPTSD, I have ADHD, and 20% of people in the world are neurodivergent. Literally 100% of people in the world are affected by trauma. And yet we avoid these things, and we don't like making accommodations for them. We don't like talking about them. So that was where I felt where I needed to be. So I came out with that new business venture January 1st. And I also started a program, a certification program called TRIPS, which stands for Trauma Informed Psychologically Safe, from the Institute of Trauma and Psychological Safety, founded by Dr. Lee C. Cordell. And we are a little over halfway through the certification, and the regulating techniques that I have learned in this certification have been life-changing. Absolutely life-changing.
Thank you so much. I know that was not easy. It really helps as someone who's listening and wanting to learn and understand and be supportive to hear your story, including the painful pieces, and also how you've taken this all the way into your own wellness and healing. And like, I can help others with this, with my experience and my growth and my willingness to stay and to get the support that I need. And so just profound, like you said, the number of people that are experiencing trauma and then neurodivergence and may most likely don't have the support that they actually need. So you being able to move into that both with your personal experience and your training, that's beautiful. So when you were in the depths of this, and I'm speaking specifically to those feelings of suicidal ideation or otherwise, because the trauma piece is hugely a part of this as well. And so although this episode, is on the focus of suicide, I totally see how those two are woven together. So speak to whatever comes to you here. And specifically with the suicide and just feeling like, I'm alone, I don't want to be here, or I don't feel like I should be here, or whatever those thoughts were. What would have helped from other people, and like what wasn't helpful and what is helpful?
So I think that shame is probably the most unhelpful thing that someone can do. And I do think that when people don't know what to say, they do tend to veer towards a shame tactic, whether or not they recognize it as such. For example, the next day after my incident, I messaged my niece and I apologized to her for putting her through all of that. And she said something along the lines of, it's not word for word, but something along the lines of, you almost had to go to the hospital last night. Like, I almost called the police on you, or I almost took you to the hospital. You're lucky I didn't, or something like that. Something to that effect. And I totally feel that she was coming from a place of care and concern, but that came off as really shameful. Like, I felt like I should apologize again and again and again. And that's just one example of how, shame can kind of weave its way into these situations where people really don't know what to say. What I think is the most helpful is sometimes not saying anything, sometimes just letting people get out what they're saying and just providing that space, that safe space for them to unload, if you will, is the most helpful thing, honestly. I really do. I can't think of any one thing that has helped me in that situation. I mean, I suppose when my partner kind of snapped at me, that helped me snap out of it. But depending on where I was, that wouldn't have helped. Like, I think it helped because it was like the next morning and like part of me was ready to snap out of it already. But if I was in the depths, I don't believe it would have helped. So I think just holding that safe space for someone is probably the most helpful thing, and it doesn't mean words.
Yeah. It sounds like that reinforcement of shame can drive someone deeper. And the safe space, openness, listening. Can you share more about, you shared about the swamping. Sounds a little bit like a venting in a safe space. Can you share more about how you've created that support for yourself so that you can do that, whether it's with someone or on your own? Because I imagine that's its own switch.
Absolutely. So part of, probably the biggest part of creating a safe space in your life for you to be able to do things like vent or swamp, or for you to be able to not be in psychologically harmful situations, is to maintain boundaries, to establish and maintain boundaries. People generally have porous boundaries. Some people have extremely rigid boundaries. The best place for us to be is somewhere in the middle. My boundaries were extremely porous. That is why I allowed myself to be subjected to, that person that got me so upset. I have actually now established a boundary where I don't interact with him at all anymore, and I won't go to things where I know he's going to be. So part of establishing a safe container around your life is, of course, like making those their accommodations, right, in the form of just boundaries and being firm about them. It's so difficult sometimes when you're first starting out to do that for yourself, right? It's easy to tell somebody how to do it. It's easy to look at somebody else's life and say, you probably shouldn't talk to that person anymore. That person is the one who's getting you, into these horrible moods, or who's making you feel so bad about yourself. Like, it's easy to say that, but when you're in the seat and you have to literally cut ties with a whole side of your family in order to keep yourself safe, then it becomes a little difficult, right? But once you do it, the feeling of relief that follows it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And so that kind of ties into how I created that safe space for swamping. Like that, so cutting off ties with that family member and anybody who had an issue with that was my first boundary that I established. Now, I left the situation that I was in when I was triggered yesterday, and I called my partner and I said, "Are you home?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, great. I just want to talk to you." And he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Nope, not okay." So I came home, and he was outside working on his bicycles. And I said, "I'm going to go inside and sit down, and I would like for you to come inside with me and sit down." He's like, "Okay." So he came in, and he sat next to me, and he put his arms around me, and he listened to me for a good 20 minutes. He didn't say anything, So you have to have people in your life that are willing to do that for you, for that to be a possibility. And if you have to say, like, "Okay, this is what I need from you," right? And if the person that you're trying to lean on still doesn't do that, if they're a fixer, if they're trying to interject and say, well, you should have done this, or why didn't you do this, or maybe this, maybe that, right? That's not what swamping is about. Swamping is a release. It's not a problem-solving session. So, yeah, establishing the boundaries, finding somebody who is absolutely willing and ready and able to be that safe space for you, if that's what you need. And then just following through on it. Now, I want to just there's a little caveat about swamping. That is just a form of swamping. There's several other forms of swamping. One that I also do very often is like rage singing in the car. That's swamping. Because, I mean, when I am not feeling like I'm in a great place mentally, I listen to angry music very, very loudly, and I sing it very, very loudly. When I'm in an emotionally regulated place, I listen to classical music. I listen to acoustic guitar. I listen to podcasts. So when I need that release, that's usually my first go-to. But when it's a really explosive moment, then I need the vent session.
Okay. Thank you for sharing how you've created that space and a little more about swamping. And it sounds like it's a way to allow emotion through in healthier ways so it doesn't kind of go inverted and...
So it doesn't boil over, because it's going to come out eventually, but you want it to come out. You want to be in control of when it comes out so you don't hurt yourself or anyone else.
Yeah, and honoring it, not pushing it down. Yes. Okay. Thank you. So how do you handle it if somebody says something that comes across as insensitive or belittling or something like that about suicide or about your experience?
I don't know that I've ever had that happen, to be quite honest, about suicide necessarily. I'm drawing a blank. Maybe it has happened. But if it did happen, I would probably need to take a couple of 4, 7, 8 breaths, because that would probably be slightly upsetting for me, depending on the context, right? And then I would assess the situation and the person and, where we're at, how well we know each other. And I would see to myself, is this a safe place? Is this a safe environment, people, place included, for me to talk about this right now? Am I in a emotionally regulated state to talk about this right now? Did the breathing work, right? Or am I activated? Because if I'm activated, it's not going to be a productive conversation, right? And so in that case, if it's activating to me, I would remove myself from the situation. I would write down what activated me and what I thought about it. And then I would reach out to that person, tell them that there was something I would like to talk about with them, and actually plan it and not sort of blindside them with it, in a safe space, right? So in open space, just them and I, not anybody else. And so we can talk about that in the safest and most regulated way as possible.
Thank you. Okay. So taking care of you and then being able to shed some light on it to them if needed.
Yeah.
To be able to, yeah.
If it's possible, if I were to walk into that situation thinking we're going to have a really constructive conversation and it's just a circle of gaslighting or ignoring or, those things, or what are you talking about? I never did that, or something like that, or it's not a big deal, those types of things. And I'm getting nowhere, then I would just probably end the conversation.
Sure. Sure. It goes back to your boundaries and taking care of you and
Yeah.
knowing what's fruitful and not, for sure.
Yeah. There's only so much energy we have, right?
Most definitely. And I'm really just hearing, and we hear this a lot when we're looking into these situations where truly care is needed, how much just listening and listening to understand is needed when people are hurting. There is a fair amount of stigma and misunderstanding around suicide. You've touched on many points to help people with that. Is there anything else you want to add from your perspective about that to help people who are still kind of learning about what's going on for someone and how to be helpful?
So I think a lot of people often do, as we said earlier, they move towards a shame tactic, like, that's so selfish. I have heard that. Now that I'm thinking about it, that is probably definitely something I've heard about suicide, is that it is very selfish. And that does bring another level of shame into it, which actually has the opposite effect on the person who's having the suicidal thoughts than what they had intended it to. So it often makes them feel even worse. So I think that people don't realize that most people don't realize that the majority of people have suicidal tendencies at some time in their life, at several points in their life. It's not this strange thing that only 5% of us go through or something like that. Like, it's very, very common, but it's not common to talk about. So the more we do talk about it, the more we can sort of normalize it and just sort of pull through it. And when I say pull through it, I mean, so if somebody is having suicidal thoughts and they feel like they can't talk to anybody else about it because there's that level of shame surrounding the idea of suicide. So then the thoughts get worse. They get deeper and stronger, and they feel alone. They feel like that suicide is the only way out of feeling this way, and those little thoughts turn into actions. Whereas if we reframe it to, okay, I'm having suicidal thoughts, I'm going to go tell my safe person, and the safe person just says, I'm here for you, I'm listening to you, I love you. The world is a better place because of you. I just want you to know that. Not you're selfish. How selfish are you? More like you, these are general positive phrases, but use some specific positive phrases about the person that if they're an expert gardener, be like, your roses are absolutely beautiful. You give me vegetables like every year. If they're a fantastic artist, like, you have made the world a more beautiful place with your art. Things like that. Things like that. But I would never suggest turning the situation around to focus on what that person's suicidal tendencies mean for you, because it's not about you. At this point, it's about them.
That reminds me of the circles of support, where if somebody's dealing with something very difficult, cancer, depression, something else, when those people close to them are struggling with it, it's helpful for them to go outside the circle versus in, which is obviously difficult in a crisis situation. However, as we learn more and we open up, like you're opening up here, then we can learn about what's more helpful and what will actually bring about a result that is going to hopefully help people stay with us for sure, and then understand how much they're cherished as well. What questions today are we not asking that we should be about this topic?
I think the only question I would have asked, it was addressed in a different manner. So the one question that I sort of expected was, how do we prevent more suicides? But I believe that we did just address that in this last question and answer, that really we address it by destigmatizing it, by taking away the shame factor, and by just loving the people as they are, loving your people as they are, suicidal thoughts and all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, and we do invite people to also listen to our other episode. I think it's episode 19 with Barb Smith and Adam Mazinski, who also share on this topic. And there's definitely a lot we can do. Prevention work in terms of learning some suicide intervention skills too, which Barb Smith's Suicide Response Network offers in the area. So along with this conversation, we have a lot to work with here. If we ever, someone, experiences that themselves, like you said, it's not necessarily as uncommon as people might think, and or if they have a loved one who is experiencing this. So for our last question today, we just want to offer you, what is your ask of our podcast listeners as they leave this conversation today?
My ask would be to check in on your friends. Check in on the ones who seem really strong, because those are often the ones that are hiding things and just hoping maybe that somebody will reach out.
Okay. Thank you. I've heard that before, and I really felt it when you said it today. It's very true. You never know what somebody's going through. So, Emily, thank you again for your courage and your heart and your commitment to your own health and well-being now, and you being willing to share your story, and then, paying it forward with the work that you're now doing and supporting the community with. I'm so grateful to have you here today.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Wonderful being here.
You can stay connected with the Visibility Project by subscribing, liking, and sharing on your favorite podcasting and social apps. Look for us at the Visibility PRJ.
Financial support is needed to keep the conversation going. Go to midlandfoundation.org/give and select the Cultural Awareness Coalition Endowment Fund to be part of the project. Note podcast in your donation notes.
Thank you for listening.
We see you.
We hear you.
And together, we are making a difference.